Thank you all for attending the 2020 Annual General Meeting of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba. Please note that the meeting is being recorded, and I want to begin with a few housekeeping matters. I'm going to ask that all participants, other than board members, please remain muted and allow your video to remain off. During the meeting, please feel free to submit any questions you may have directly to the moderator through the Zoom chat function. Questions will be addressed following the adjournment of the meeting. When sending your questions, please ensure your chat window is set to send directly to moderator. We're excited to have you join us today as we, for the first time, deliver our annual general meeting via this online platform. We would have loved to see all of you in person, but in place of that personal touch, we're thrilled to be able to deliver an exciting recap of 2019 directly to you, wherever you may be. Once again, thank you all for attending. And I want to mention how happy I am to see such a healthy representation from our various community organizations this evening on our Zoom platform. At this time, I would like to welcome two representatives from our auditors, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Travis Muir and Joel Murchison. Travis and Joel, we very much appreciate your taking the time to join us this evening. Our first order of business today will be the approval of minutes of the 2019 Annual General Meeting of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, which was held on June the 19th, 2019. Now, before I ask for a motion, I'd like to explain how we're going to address motions at the meeting. For our purposes here today, when passing motions, in lieu of a show of hands to display votes in favor, I will instead ask only for an indication of any voting members who are opposed. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes of the 2019 Annual General Meeting of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba?
Yes, I would like to move that the minutes of the AGM held on June 19th, 2019 be approved as circulated.
Thanks, Becky. Becky Kaufman. May I have a seconder, please?
I second the motion.
Thanks, Caroline. Caroline Kiva. Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. Motion carried. Our priority for 2019 was to find a new Chief Executive Officer who could continue to guide the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba and lead us in growing the Foundation's resources. After an extensive search, which lasted most of the year, we hired John Diamond, an accomplished lawyer and asset manager, who began in his position this past February. I want to express sincere thanks to Stephanie Kazar and Ian Barnes, who together led the Foundation while we were without a CEO, and who both supported the board with dedication and professionalism during the interim period. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce and welcome John Diamond.
Thank you, Richard. And good afternoon to everyone. It is an honor to be able to serve our community and the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba as CEO. It has been an eventful first few months, and I would be remiss if I did not first take a couple of minutes to thank all of the board and staff for their guidance as together we learn, adapt, and grow through this unprecedented time. As you know, my tenure at the Foundation did not begin until February of this year. However, I have been given the honor and privilege to present some of the highlights of 2019. The JFM celebrated events, welcomed new fund holders, and took great pride in making grants to essential community initiatives. Every donor contribution is an act of kindness that sends waves of love and support reverberating throughout our community. Some highlights from milestones from 2019 include the following. Our distribution rate was able to remain at 4.2%, and all funds that will be distributed this year reflect that rate. Please note that due to rapid changes in our economy as a result of COVID-19, decisions with respect to our 2020 distribution rate have been deferred until later this year. In a typical year, our distribution rate would have already been set. This directive from the board has granted us the ability to make a more informed decision and allow us to distribute next year at the best possible rate. We distributed roughly $5.2 million to remarkable programs and services benefiting the Jewish community and Manitobans of all backgrounds. We remain the second largest public charitable foundation in Manitoba. In 2019, we continued to grow our asset base. This year, our generous donors contributed over $5.6 million to the endowment. A key element of 2019 to our endowment is organizational endowment funds. It can never be said enough that our Jewish organizations are the cornerstone of our vibrant community. They continue to demonstrate their great foresight and long-term planning with continued commitment to the growth of their organizational endowment funds. In 2019, organizational endowment funds distributed over $1.2 million to 31 Jewish organizations. This yearly distribution delivers organizations a steadfast source of income that can be depended upon in times of prosperity and uncertainty alike. We applaud all 31 of these organizations and look forward to continuing to cultivate these endowments, ensuring the unbelievable community programming they provide will be enjoyed and cherished by future generations just as they are today. Your future is our future. Other events include the following. In May, we hosted our Jewish Foundation of Manitoba Luncheon in support of the Women's Endowment Fund. Fashion icon and well-known television personality Jeannie Becker was the keynote speaker for a packed room of over 400 patrons, raising nearly $70,000 for the Women's Endowment Fund. This year, our Endowment Book of Life program welcomed a class of 13 individuals who immortalized both their financial and historical legacies in our community. This year's participants were celebrated at the 2019 EBOL Signers Brunch held Sunday, October 27, 2019, which featured a spirited performance of songs paying tribute to past signers by the Winnipeg Jewish Theatre. November brought a revitalization of our Allied Professional series in the form of a moderated luncheon session titled, Talking with Your Clients About Philanthropy, with presentations by panelists Leilani Kagan and Ryan Palmer, moderated by Dwayne Osborne. These Allied Professional events are an initiative aimed to educate, foster relationships, and show our appreciation for professionals providing advice and support to donors working towards their philanthropic goals. The 2019 annual report showcases even more highlights of 2019, as well as the JFM's full summary of distribution. Following the meeting today, we will be supplying all attendees access to the digital version of this report, with physical copies hitting mailboxes in mid-July. Again, I would like to thank all of the Jewish Foundation's staff for their hard work throughout the year. I would also like to point some specific individuals for ensuring our first virtual AGM is a success. Thank you to Drew Unger, Stephanie Kazar, and Laurel Hogan, all behind the scenes. And thank you, Richard.
John, thanks very much. I'd now like to welcome Dan Blankstein, Treasurer of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, to deliver the 2019 financial report. Dan?
Thank you, Richard. The 2019 financial statements reflect the return from both the JFM's investment portfolio and the continued generosity of donors. Highlights a return of 15.34% before fees, compared to negative 1.84% in 2018. We received contributions of $5.7 million in 2019 versus $7.5 million in 2018. Our auditors, PricewaterhouseCoopers, provided an unqualified opinion of the JFM's financial statements for 2019. Now, as we turn to some slides, a statement of financial position. Under assets, we see that the fair value of the investment portfolio is $134.5 million, which is $17.3 million greater than 2018, for an increase of 14.8%. The fair value of the asset base is $137 million, $16.7 million greater than 2018, an increase of 13.9%. Next slide, please. As we turn to the liabilities and net assets, we see under current liabilities that an increase in grant commitments is primarily due to an increase in flow-through commitments at the year end. Flow-through commitments will vary from year to year based on donor activities. Encroachable funds payable is the market value of monies of two organizations who maintain beneficial ownership subject to certain call provisions. Under net assets, the operating fund holds over $418,000 in surplus at the end of 2019. This represents the net income for the year after reserve fund allocation. The surplus reflects a positive investment performance year. The reserve fund has been allocated its maximum level of 2 years of distributions. This fund reflects the board-mandated reserve fund policy to allocate, during strong markets, the equivalent of approximately 2 years of distributions for periods of adverse market conditions. The reserve fund level was previously nil at the end of 2018. Endowment funds are the contributed capital of endowments, and this has increased by $5.7 million over the past year, or 5%. Next slide, please. Now we see the statement of operations. The realized gross revenue of $8.8 million before investment counsel and custodial fees is $1.4 million less than 2018, a decrease of 13.7%. This is primarily due to a decrease in dividend income of $1.2 million, or 16%. The $29,000 increase in custodial and investment fees, 12.7%, is the result of the growth in the market value of the portfolio from the previous year. Investment management fees are based on the net asset value of the assets under management. Grant income represents endowment distributions received from JFM USA based on the gifts of US donors. If we look to expenses, we see that direct programming and cost recoveries represent disbursements for JFM's various events and programs. Amortization is also included in these operating expenses. For 2019, these operating expenses aggregated to $1.68 million, $210,000 lower than the previous year, or a decrease of 11%. Under grant commitments, we see that designated grant commitments in aggregate were $600,000 higher than the previous year, or an increase of 13%. This was due to organic growth in the designated funds. Undesignated grant commitments were $169,000 higher than 2018. Next slide, please. We see that flow-through commitments represent distributions initiated by donors directly and primarily to third-party organizations. Now, a final note with regards to market activity. The unrealized gain of $9.9 million on investments in 2019 was a dramatic turnaround from the 2018 unrealized loss of $12.5 million. However, the world is currently affected by both the health-related and financial impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, the investment environment is fluid, and the related financial impact cannot be reasonably estimated at this time. And that's my report. Thank you.
Dan, thank you very much for your wonderful report. As you can see, all in all, 2019 was a very successful year for our foundation. May I please have a motion for the approval of the 2019 financial statements of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba?
I move the approval of the 2019 financial statements of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba.
Thanks, Dan. Dan Blankstein. May I have a seconder, please?
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
Thanks, Sean. Sean Shore. Any opposed? I see none opposed. Motion carried. We now move on to the appointment of auditors for the 2020 fiscal year. May I please have a motion to appoint PricewaterhouseCoopers as the auditors of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba for the 2020 fiscal year?
To appoint PricewaterhouseCoopers as auditors for the 2020 fiscal year.
Thanks, Yael. Yael Silver. May I have a seconder, please?
Yes, Jeff Norton, I'll second the motion.
Thanks, Jeff. Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. Motion carried. You have already heard that 2019 was an exceptional year for the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba. From the donations of our generous donors to the performance of our portfolio, there was prosperity to be found in all facets of the foundation. The work we did last year has put us in a strong position for the future. This, of course, is the fundamental goal of a community endowment foundation such as ours. As we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, our goals for the balance of 2020 include creating a new 5-year strategic plan and revisiting and possibly slightly revising our governance structure. With the events that have transpired in the first half of this year, we now know that 2020 is destined to be a very different year, but in no way a step back. The JFM's investment portfolio is managed, as always, for the long term. Our portfolio will remain well diversified and positioned to withstand periods of uncertainty, such as the one we are currently experiencing. Through this uncertainty, our development staff has continued with the stewardship of donors, engaging in conversations, and looking forward to new and innovative ways through which donors and prospective donors can continue to support our community through the JFM. Part of these conversations shines a spotlight onto our undesignated funds. It's through these funds that the JFM was able to respond so swiftly to community needs brought on by the pandemic. And it will be through the continued development and growth of our undesignated funds in particular that the foundation will have the flexibility to evolve and address new and probably currently unforeseen needs within our community. In a typical year, the available undesignated funds would be distributed to organizations in our province through the JFM's Jewish Community, General Community, and Women's Endowment Fund grants. This year is somewhat anomalous. Regular funding is being superseded by our COVID-19 relief initiative. By the end of 2020, we will have distributed more than $700,000 in relief funding. And I want to make specific mention of the work of the JFM staff, the members of our grants committee, and our board, all of whom have shown remarkable dedication over the past few months in determining how the JFM can best assist. Our response has been laid out in 3 phases. The goals of phase 1 were speed, efficiency, and inclusiveness. The foundation was aware that shortfalls were developing throughout our Jewish community organizations. An inability to fundraise and the requirement to work remotely, coupled with poor market returns and a host of other destabilizing factors, would place every one of our organizations at a disadvantage. Our response was to develop a matrix that would guide $200,000 of operational relief to 28 Manitoba-based Jewish organizations. Each organization's financial reports and operational expenses were the basis that dictated the level of funding it would receive. To be respectful of a variety of unique circumstances currently faced by individual organizations, at this time, we will leave the disclosure of the amount they received to their discretion. Total amounts received in 2020 by each organization will, of course, be published in our 2020 annual report. Phase 1 also included the distribution of $68,000 to 4 frontline general community charities in Winnipeg: Agape Table, Winnipeg Harvest, the Main Street Project, and Siloam Mission. Additionally, through the generosity of an anonymous donor, a matching donation of $34,000 was made possible, bringing the total distributed to these 4 charities to $102,000. The spring distribution of Women's Endowment Fund grants saw $30,000 distributed to 5 organizations who continue to support our most vulnerable women and children during what is possibly their greatest time of need: North End Women's Resource Center, Willow Place, Salvation Army, Alpha House, and the West Central Resource Center all received relief to aid them in their tireless efforts. For Phase 2, criteria were developed by the Grants Committee and approved by the Board. Application instructions were then supplied to all Manitoba-based Jewish organizations. This phase of funding will again supply over $200,000 of financial relief. The opportunity to apply for funding under Phase 2 has been well received. The applications of 14 organizations have now been considered by our Grants Committee, and later today, their recommendations will be before the Board for consideration and approval. Information about the Phase 3 distribution will be developed and released shortly. Since the onset of the pandemic, it has been our belief that constant communication with our donors, our organizations, and our other stakeholders is vital. And I think that the allied efforts and open lines of communication between the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba and the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg to formulate our complementary responses are perhaps unprecedented, and I believe are serving our community well. The pandemic experience has opened our eyes to new realities, and it's our responsibility to take the necessary steps to make sure this organization has the structure and flexibility to support our community for the years and decades to come. Once again, please feel free to submit questions through the Zoom chat platform, and we will address them following the adjournment of the meeting. It's now my great pleasure to acknowledge 2 recent staff appointments, each of which is very well deserved. Stephanie Kazar has been appointed Director of Development and Gift Planning, and Drew Unger has been appointed Director of Marketing and Communications. Congratulations and well done, both of you. And in addition to recognizing these new appointments, I would also like to thank the entire staff of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba for all of their contributions and dedication over the past year. John Diamond, CEO, Marla Arnovich, Director of Operations and Grants, Ian Barnes, Chief Financial Officer, Patty Boorman, Director of Administration, Stephanie Kazar, Director of Development and Gift Planning, Marcia Cowan, Strategic Development Specialist, Jocelyn Dyson, Administrative Associate. Laurel Hogan, Donor Development Associate. Linda Joyal, Accountant. Pamela Manuke, Donor Relations Associate. Drew Unger, Director of Marketing and Communications. And Jennifer Wood, Manager of Information Technology. Before we close, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the recent loss of one of our own JFM governors, the Honorable Guy J. Croft. The past president of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, his guidance helped mold our organization into what it is today, and we are eternally grateful for everything he did. To us, Guy Croft was a leader, a role model, and a friend. I now ask for a motion for the adjournment of the annual general meeting.
Motion. Could I make that? I would like to make that motion.
Thank you, Jeff Lieberman. I declare the meeting adjourned. Once again, a huge thank you to all of you for attending what I think is probably the best attended AGM in the JFM's history. I'm now going to see if we have any questions submitted to the chat platform, and we will answer as many as possible. I see none so far. Am I right in that? Okay. We'll wait another minute. I see no questions. Laurel, can you just confirm that there are none? Okay. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Please keep safe and healthy, and we wish you all the very best for the rest of 2020. Thanks.